Out of control, our body's falling apart. So I'm Dr. Matt, Dr. Eric here in a second. Just want to introduce a little bit about Dr. Eric. Obviously he has an extensive amount of knowledge about chiropractic, but he is our guru in the office for soft tissue. I think some of you guys have already had some of the stuff he's done on it. It's extremely beneficial, and he knows a lot of information about soft tissue and extremities. So you're going to get a lot of knowledge out today. So again, then I don't want to give it away too much, but we'll have a second part coming up here next month, so you definitely want to stay tuned to that. So without further ado, this is Dr. Eric, and we'll get you started.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. So, falling apart syndrome. We're dealing with upper extremities, so typically shoulders, elbows, wrists. And this is a part of our body signals workshop series. And when we're talking body signals, ultimately a more common word that we use for that is symptoms. Because we have intelligent bodies, where you have every one of us blessed with this amazing piece of material that is self-healing, it's designed to be healthy, it's going to try to adapt in the face of anything you throw at it. And when we have body signals, that's your body's way of trying to communicate to you and tell you something. Like, in some of us, unfortunately, we have our bodies talking to us a little bit more than we ideally would like to. Is that fair? So when our body is talking to us, we really have to pay attention to what it's telling us. If I'm having something like pain, the pain is a symptom. It's the body signal. It's my brain's way of trying to tell me, hey, pay attention, something's going on down here. But that's not identifying what's causing that body signal. And that's what we focus on in this office, is trying to root out the causes of people's problems, correct the cause. Then you not only alleviate the symptoms and get rid of the symptoms, but you restore proper function and set them up for a lifetime of success. So when we're talking pain, we got to think the iceberg model. Pain's that part. That's the part that's going to sink your boat. And that's the part that can't tell you, ouch, I hurt. So I want you to keep that in mind as we're going through. So, and when we're talking about a shoulder, we have to talk a little bit about what the kinetic chain is. So kinetic chain is a concept that was a German engineer, German engineer, it was Franz Rollo. It was 1870 something. And he realized that complex machines that have multiple joints, each one of those joints bears an impact on every other joint in the system. And now more commonly we refer to our extremities as part of the kinetic chain. So there's an open kinetic chain, which basically means it's not weight bearing. Your closed kinetic chain is your legs, and we'll be having a workshop on that next time. And for everybody that's joining us live, if you have any questions as you're going through, post them as you're going on. I won't be addressing them at the end of the video, but I will be addressing them over the course of the next 24 to 48 hours. And all you guys, when we get done at the end of the workshop, we'll have definitely some opportunity to have some question answer too. So the kinetic chain, we have this shoulder, we have this arm, we have a lot of motion here. The sacrifice of having a lot of mobility and motion is stability, okay? So unfortunately, because we have so much motion, especially in the shoulder joint and in that wrist joint, we are very prone to a lot of instability. And sometimes when we have an issue, like say the old football injury that screwed up my shoulder, and then a few years down the road I'm getting wrist issues, and then elbow issues, and neck issues, and that's how the whole I'm falling apart thing. It's just one thing leads to another, and that's how we got the falling apart syndrome. So we're going to talk about shoulder pain, we're going to talk about range of motion, elbow problems, wrist problems, numbness, tingling, all kinds of things tonight. Now, a lot of it, we have to look at what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of the issues that we experience in our upper extremities are related to the common theme that everybody in these pictures has. So what's something that everybody in these pictures is doing? Yeah, this. Our waking hours, probably 90% of our waking hours, if not more, we're doing something like this. Some of us take it to an extreme, and we're even doing stuff like this when we're trying to sleep and heal and regenerate. And your body's smart. If I'm going to sit around like this all the time, this takes energy. My brain's eventually going to be like, okay, this is what I got to do. I'm going to start adapting and modifying everything in there, the bone, the soft tissue, everything, to make this easier and normal. And most everybody here is a practice member here, so we've done x-rays, we've done things, and we've talked about things like arthritis at various times, and that's how the body's remodeling these structures, trying to adapt to the stresses that it's got to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So, prolonged flexion leads to weakness in our extensor muscles, our muscles in our back, our upper shoulders, our neck that bring us back. Doing this for a long time makes those things weak. It's called reciprocal leg. So if I flex my bicep, my triceps automatically going to relax. If I flex my tricep, my biceps automatically relax. If I work all my flexors, all these extensors are automatically going to relax. And if they're in that prolonged state of not functioning, not being utilized, eventually those fibers get used to being elongated and things get weak and more prone to cause injuries. And then of course subluxation. You knew we were going to talk about subluxation here. Subluxation is the thing that we look for correct when we're addressing everybody's health. And when we're talking about upper extremity issues, really we're talking about that mid to lower neck getting into that upper back, T5 to T1. And what that forms is the brachial plexus. So the brachial plexus is just a bundle of nerve that branches directly off your neck and kind of passes down through that shoulder and feeds everything into that arm. And these are the nerves we're typically trying to alleviate pressure on when we're adjusting those neck issues. And a lot of times people have things like they're having problems in their wrists or something like that, and they go get a more invasive thing like a carpal tunnel surgery or something like that. But then these problems start to come back on them, or that they never get good results in the first place because we've never really addressed the problem at that source of the nerve. And I always love the analogy of the river's like a nervous system. If you put a dam in a river, what does that do?
Stop or slows the flow.
Yeah, what does it affect? Everything downstream from that dam. And then if I have a river that's going all the way down my arm and I'm putting multiple dams along that, which we'll talk about more later, perhaps that first dam's not enough to drive the water flow, as it were, or the nerve flow, but you add all those insults as we go along, and next thing you know, I've got all these problems down in my fingertips. My hands constantly falling asleep. I can't hold a cup of coffee, things like that. So subluxation definitely impacts our entire life, not just in the neck, but the entire spine. And the entire spine is related. A lot of what happens up here is related to what happens down here. So I'm sure some of you have been adjusted by someone else, and you're like, oh, the problem's up here, and we start right here, or we start down here. And you're like, well, I understand, that's where you're feeling everything. That's where your body signals are. That's where your brain's trying to say something's not right in there. But we're feeling for those major subluxations, and sometimes these ones are compensating for these ones. So that's our job as a chiropractor, is figure out what's the best adjustment to give to each person every single time they're there to get the best results with their adjustment. So, subluxation, basically you get that bone out of alignment. That causes soft tissue damage. The disc becomes inflamed and that creates irritation. So a lot of people have this concept that a disc is kind of like this thick hockey puck type thing, and it's really, couldn't be further from the truth. That's a really complex organ. I kind of like the analogy of a jelly donut. It's not perfect, but you have that kind of fibrous outside, the cake outside of the donut, and then you have this jelly nucleus. And that nucleus gets all of its nutrition and everything through motion. And when that joint is stuck out of alignment, there's irritation. Your body's smart, right? It wants to protect that. How is it going to protect it? If Lindsay was about to come and punch me in the stomach right now, what would I do? I'd flex my gut. Same thing with all those paraspinal muscles. You get a subluxation in there, the brain detects it, it's going to be, okay, something's not right in here, protect it. Locks down all those muscles, and that's what some of those scans help us read, is where those muscle irritations are. And that muscle spasm leads to loss of inhibition, which is a big fancy word for that pumping action that helps keep those discs hydrated and healthy. Because discs don't have good vascular supply. They don't have good blood supply that penetrates in. Your body basically deposits everything it needs around the outside of that disc. It creates motion is what pushes that in. A good analogy there is if I had a bottle full of water and I put one drop of food coloring in there and I just let it sit there, what's going to happen over time? Somebody, what's going to happen? It's going to diffuse out through it, right? What's going to happen if I shake that thing up? It's going to diffuse a lot faster, right? So that's what the motion is. It's shaking up that water bottle to keep all that good stuff going in and push all the bad stuff that you don't need anymore out so your body can get rid of it. We have that voice, and that starts to lead to degeneration. And degenerate, we think arthritis. And who here thinks arthritis is just part of getting old? Just normal. Yeah, and we hear it all the time. But do you think that it's been 45 long years, my spine's been doing pretty good, but it's like, okay, I'm done. I've been 45 years, I'm just going to give up. I'm just going to start degenerating and let all this arthritis form everywhere. We see people that are less than 20 years old who have extensive arthritis because they've had some serious traumas in their lives and their body has adapted with that bone spring, with that extra bone growth. I've seen people that are in their 60s, 70s, 80s with beautiful non-arthritic looking spines because they took care of it all their life. So arthritis is not normal. Arthritis is the result of these chronic irritations caused by these chronic subluxations that don't ever get truly corrected. So when we're talking about shoulders, and there's a whole list of shoulder problems, in the interest of time, we're going to keep it more limited to some of the ones we more commonly see in the office, things like rotator cuff tendonitis, shoulder instability, bursitis, thoracic outlet syndrome, and AC joint pain. So moving right into it, we got to talk a little bit about anatomy. So the shoulder is a muscular joint. It's a very strong joint and it allows for a lot of motion, but we sacrifice stability, like I said. So we have this scapula, the shoulder blade, and it just kind of floats there. It's not really anchored into the rib cage. It's held on by a bunch of muscle and everything, okay? The only thing that really holds our shoulder to our body is this strut called the clavicle, the collarbone. And we have two joints that are formed by that collarbone. There's your sternoclavicular joint, and there's your AC joint. Everything else, that thing is just kind of hanging on there. That humerus comes up, it articulates with that scapula. That scapula is just kind of hanging on there. The only thing stabilizing that scapula to your actual body physically with a joint is this stuff right here. And that's a pretty small joint, right? You can imagine some of the demands we put on our upper body and our extremities, especially if we have a lot of muscle instability, a lot of weakness in there, because those muscles are really what's designed to keep those shoulders functioning. We start putting all that stress on these joints, and that's when we start to have all these shoulder problems that tend to cascade down to wrist problems, elbow problems, neck problems, and all over the place. So we have that going on, and the rotator cuff. So when we get a rotator cuff strain, there's really deconditioning, because like I said, the shoulder is a muscular joint. We have basically 4 muscles that comprise that rotator cuff. So if I were to take the scapula off the body and turn it around, so I'm looking at, this is the rib cage, this is the underside of the scapula, there's that big, strong muscle called the subscapularis, and that's basically what anchors your scapula to your body, okay? And then we have your teres minor that comes on the outside of that, so this is looking at someone actually from the back. You have your infraspinatus muscle, and then you have your supraspinatus muscle, and those are named for that spine that runs up right there. And this is typically the culprit that we see when someone comes in with a rotator cuff issue. And a lot of times where you're going to feel that, right up and through here. You'll get that deep, gnawing, nagging pain, especially when you're doing any kind of motion in there, and those are typically what we see on people. It leads to a lot, it's typically a repetitive stress type thing. That's what it's wearing it out. And we get a lot of inflammation there that creates that pain and instability that people typically come to us when they're with that kind of a shoulder injury. And then we have bursas. So bursas are basically a fluid-filled sac, a fluid-filled cushion. So imagine if I had a piece of rope, and that rope is a tendon, okay? And that's rubbing over a hard surface. What's going to happen to that rope if I'm constantly rubbing that rope over it? It's going to start to fray and break. The same thing would happen with our connective tissue. That's why we have these bursa in here. Now bursa, it's designed to cushion that gliding action over that, but when these things become inflamed, it's a pretty significant sharp pain. And again, it's an overuse thing, and it's by and large a postural thing. And typically that one, you're going to feel it right in here. You're going to get that sharp, intense, burning type pain right in there. Any kind of motion, especially overhead type motion, that's what we tend to see when we're dealing with more of a bursitis. And they can be very, very painful, especially if we can't alleviate that excess pressure on that bursa to get that swelling to start to go down. And these are the big culprits. Who here sleeps like this? Or has slept like that? Or the fun one, the people that are driving up, you see them going down, you're kicked off to the side like this, or driving around like that. And that's putting a lot of pressure on that shoulder. It's also causing a lot of issues as I'm kicked off to the side like this and the rest of my spine, but keeping it specific to the shoulder, this guy, say I sleep 6 hours like that. If I stood here like this for the next 10, 15 minutes, I think my arm's gonna bother me a little bit. Now, I have the weight on my head, and I've got a pretty big head. And I'm sitting like that for 6 to 8 hours, and then I wake up and I wonder why is my shoulder bothering me? Well, it's because I have some pretty bad habits that are contributing to it. Thoracic outlet syndrome. So we mentioned that brachial plexus a little bit ago when we were talking anatomy, and that brachial plexus, it passes from your spine, which is more in the back of the spine, and it comes forward and down, and it passes between your rib cage and that clavicle. And what thoracic outlet syndrome is when we get compression on that nerve at that point, and that'll affect, we're putting a dam in the river right there, that's going to affect everything that goes down from there. So it's, again, it's a postural thing, it's often lifting, it's often wearing heavy things on our shoulders or doing things above our heads again. We get that nerve impingement that leads to inflammation, and it'll affect the entire upper extremity. It'll also start to affect this upper spine, these rib joints and things like that, because as the muscles start to spasm, the shoulder being a very powerful joint, everything that shoulder, those muscles are anchored into, get affected when those muscles go into that state of prolonged contraction, trying to guard things. We typically experience a lot of issues like pain, numbness, tingling, burning sensations, weakness going down to that arm, which are common to a lot of the issues we get as we get issues that go into our extremities. So this is one of the big ones. Who's guilty of this one? This is me every time. I always want to get it in one trip. We got a running bet with my girl. I'll get it all in one trip. She does the same thing. It's always like, I'm sitting there going like that, then I get to the door, and it's like, how the heck am I going to open the door here? And then you got to put it down and try to find the keys, and you always leave the keys in the pocket of the opposite side, you put it down. We all could probably use the extra exercise of a couple extra trips out to the car. So that. And then these ones. Some of you are teachers. Some of you see the kids standing at the bus stops. We've got backpacks in there. Dr. Matt did a backpack workshop or webinar that was last year. What is it? It's supposed to be like 20% of the body weight or something like 20% or less ideally. Is that what that 20% are for body weight? I mean, we've got a little Navy or Army Ranger running around with a war backpack on here ready, and then she's wondering why I got these problems. Look at the posture she's got to hold just to counteract that. If she tried to stand up, that thing's going to pull her back and she's going to be like a turtle on her back. So she's walking around like this, pinching everything, holding everything in a bad posture, and compressing down on that clavicle, which is pinching all those nerves. Obesity is a big one too. So the more current statistics, around 75% of our population is overweight. So I have a lot of excess weight, especially we tend to build up that adipose tissue, that fat tissue up in front. That's pulling down on everything. All that's connected to somewhere, and it's going to start putting impingement up in the shoulders too. So that's another thing that we're commonly seeing contributing to a lot of our shoulder issues that a lot of people don't really think connect the dots between. So then AC joint. So the far end of that clavicle comes up and forms that tiny joint. And this is probably one of the more common ones. When someone's coming to me and they go, oh doc, I need to get my shoulder adjusted in there. We get there and adjust that shoulder. That thing it's a postural stress and repetitive strain on that thing. And when that thing subluxates, that little piece tends to pop up like that. And we can adjust it. We can help get it back in place. But we can only do it for so long. So that's what these workshops are about, is helping you to help us to help you. Arm you guys with the type of knowledge that you need to alleviate the pressures that we're putting on that tiny, tiny little joint, because we're deconditioning all the muscles that are ideally supposed to help hold, move, and support the function of that joint. So we get the AC joint pain. It's typically very focal, right in here, kind of that top of that shoulder. You can put your finger right on it. It's typically a sharp or burning type of pain. We have a lot of inflammation with it. A lot of times there's subluxation in that actual joint too. Subluxations in the spine that contribute to everything that supports that joint. So AC joint, that's another really common issue that we're seeing. And this is one of the common stresses we see. So it's almost like you have moms, they got that hip. It's just made to balance that kid on, and then that kid's holding on, and they're constantly pulling down like that, dragging down on that, causing that AC joint to want to pop up. Or this one, we got a very serious condition that we're seeing these days called big purse syndrome. So purses are getting pretty insane. I mean, you come out, my girlfriend's biggest purse is like, I don't even consider it really a purse. It's like, this is like, I could go on a weekend trip somewhere and keep all my luggage in that thing. And that's like, we're just calling that thing around. And it's and I'm not meaning to pick on you ladies, we got men walking around with purse these days too. But that's what we do, especially when you have those single straps or those single strap backpacks that were, they used to be a big fad back when I was going through school. I still see them, not as much anymore because we're realizing they're bad for us. But I'm putting out, let's put all that weight of this kid Now I've got it all focused on one shoulder instead of distributed over both shoulders. So now I've just got one really, really jacked up shoulder, and then one that kind of works better, but now it's overcompensating for this one, and everything's just falling apart. These are the issues that we typically see when we're dealing with shoulder problems as far as with the spine. C2, C5 through C7 and getting to that upper thoracic spine. That's the nerves that directly support all that musculature and everything that helps to hold this very muscular joint together. So self-care, what can we do ourselves to help alleviate our shoulder pains, our shoulder issues? First is rest it. You gotta rest it. And this is one of the hardest ones, especially for those people that have those very active jobs where they're always gotta be doing something, and you tell them, hey, you just gotta rest it. And they're a lot of times not giving themselves enough recuperation time to really get on top of things. Another thing is ice. I mean, you guys know we recommend ice probably like 50 times a day to people. Whenever we're adjusting or moving things around, ice helps control inflammation. Inflammation is your enemy when it comes to your healing. So icing things and removing that inflammation. And then exercises. So, as far as correcting the subluxation, in this office we always approach subluxation and chronic subluxation patterns as a three-pronged approach. We call it three-legged stool. There's your adjustments in rhythm. And I know some of you have just started with care here, some of you have been going for a long time. But pretty much at every point in your journey through here, you guys are coming with a fair degree of consistency in the beginning, am I right? That's the adjustments in rhythm, and it's crucial. And you miss your appointment, who's calling you? One of the girls. If you miss a couple appointments, who's calling you? One of us doctors. It's not that we want to harp on you and rag on you or anything like that. We know that those adjustments in rhythm are so crucial to people's success and getting results. Because if you think about it, if your body's taken so long, it's taken years and years and years to adapt to my poor posture, we give that adjustment, we're giving that thing a nudge in the right direction. And say, okay, we'll see you in 2 weeks. 2 weeks go by, what's your body done? Gone back to what it's adapted to and accepted as normal. And that's why we're simply doing it a couple times a week, 3 times a week, sometimes more, depending. Sometimes we have somebody come in, we're like, get you here in the morning, we'll check again in the evening. So some people, we gotta deliver that message with that rhythm to create the success. We also have the bad habits, and we're always talking about bad habits in this office, trying to identify what are the stresses. So we had somebody who had kind of a breakthrough the other day, and I think it was after that Facebook talking about driving like this. And they're like, oh, I figured out what I'm doing. They weren't driving, they were driving like this, though. And this is a person who commutes and is on the road a lot. And they were having shoulder issues. And I'm like, I figured it out. And I said, well, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to put my hands down here. I'm going to drive down here. That takes a lot of pressure off my shoulders, and I'm still driving my car safely. And then exercises. Exercises are crucial. Stretches and exercises. Everybody in this office that ever pursues any kind of care here, they're getting some degree of exercises, stretches along the way. And so, when it comes to our shoulders, basically, there's a series of exercises. So, there's a lot of muscles in here. I'm going to talk about the exercise that helps strengthen these muscles. We have what are called our deep protector muscles. Those are those rotator cuff muscles that we talked about in a couple slides back. We have our positioner muscles, so the deltoid. It's kind of like a shoulder pad on there. That one helps position. We have our propellers, our powerful lifters. So that's your weight lifters. They're doing the bench presses, they're doing the pull-ups, working those lats, working those pecs. Those are our propeller muscles. But these are the ones we often neglect and ignore when we're doing things that are working with upper body. So I'm going to show you guys some basic stretches that we can add in to work these muscles. And these are the muscles. So the lower trap is one of the muscles that typically gets weakened. And the trap is that huge thing like that. But this is the area that's going to more directly impact these shoulders. We have our rhomboids, where if I dissect that trapezius off of somebody, you have these rhomboids, a layer beneath it. And then we have that serratus anterior. So think of it like your really buff bodybuilder, and they're flexing, and they got those chiseled ripple things here. That's your serratus anterior. And we've all got them under there. It's just some of us don't have them where we go like that. We have them popping out. So these are the stretches that are designed to address that. So the first one's your push-up plus. So, and I will demonstrate these for these. So with the push-up plus, you're in your push-up position. Your arms are straight. You bring your shoulders back like that. And then you extend it all the way up. Bring your shoulders back like that. Y'all think you're able to do that? That's going to really work these serratus muscles, okay? And when you're doing it, you can start on like a wall. Get up like that. Sink in, push away. Sink Kick in, push away. As that gets boring and you're gonna have to do a lot of that to get any kind of burn or action in there, next step, grab a chair. Now I'm adding some more weight to it. Make sure it's a stable chair, I'm not so sure about this one. Push up, push away. Keep those elbows straight though. See how my elbows aren't bending? All that action right up in here, okay? Next step, if you want to be a rock star, get down there, push up. Short little push-ups. That's going to really isolate those muscles there. Then there's the wall angel. So wall angel concept is you're getting up, and this is going to be for those rhomboid muscles. So you're getting your back up against the wall, keep everything in contact, you're going to reach up, you're going to reach out. And then bring it down. Keep those elbows against the wall, keep those arms against the wall. Up and down. Seems pretty simple, right? This burns quite a bit actually. When you guys try it, you'll be surprised. And then there's our reach, lift, and roll. This one's designed for that lower trap. So this one, again, very simple in appearance, but we get down on all fours. Let's see if I can get over here. So I'm down kind of like in a child yoga pose. I reach out with my hand, flip it over, and then I lift it up as high as I can. This is actually pretty hard. And then you bring it back down, bring it back, repeat with the other side. So all of those, I would start up with sets of 8. And you can gradually work up and do these things with a fair degree of regularity, okay? Now moving down to the elbow. So elbow, some of the more common things we see in there are things like bursitis. We have a bursitis in the elbow, tennis elbow, golfer elbow, and then something called cubital tunnel syndrome. So, getting right into it, let's talk anatomy. Elbow is a much more stable joint than the shoulder. You have this, the ulna, the big bone, kind of hooks on to that bottom of the humerus, that arm bone that goes up like this, okay? And then you have this thing, it kind of looks like a nail of a head or a head of a nail or something. That's what allows us to supinate and pronate, turn our forearm like that. So that little thing right there is rotating around that ulna head, whereas that hinge joint created by the ulna is what allows us to flex, okay? So it is a much more stable joint, but we still can develop issues. One of the more common ones is our bursas. So we have a bursa underneath there. Again, those bursas are protecting those soft tissues from our bones as they constantly are rubbing against it. And this one, most common stress we see, we get a lot of postural physical stress, inflammation, swelling. It's this stuff. So I have a challenge for all of you, because we all do this, and we all do this a lot more than we realize. Pay attention over the course of the next week. How often am I leaning? How often am I putting pressure on one of my elbows or both of my elbows? That's going to potentially inflame that bursa sac. And when those, have you ever seen the person that's walking around, like you're walking around the grocery store, they have that huge knob, it usually looks bright red, it looks ticked off, looks inflamed, looks like it does not feel good, and it doesn't. That's typically a bursa, okay? Then we have our tennis elbow golf, so lateral epicondylitis. So that's a big fancy way of saying tennis elbow. So we have what's our epicondyles are that upper part of the bone. I think I got it. The humerus has 2 epicondyles. When it's tennis elbow, it's on the outside. When it's golfer's elbow, it's on the inside. And they're both overused things. You have that constant, so they call it tennis elbow because people who, I'm not a tennis player, so excuse my form here, but you're extending, you're doing that backhand swing. And that's putting a lot of pressure, and it's my extensor muscles going like this, okay? And it's overuse of that. We get a lot of inflammation, overuse, and that creates a lot of usually focal pain right on that point, okay? Then we have our golfer's elbow. That's our flexors. So we have our extenders and our flexors. Those flexors attach into that medial side, that inside. And that's what stresses when they're doing those repetitive. And again, it's the same type of symptoms. Overuse, inflammation, lots of pain, typically very focal pain in there. That's typically repetitive wear and tear, stress and strain. So working above your head, especially doing physical labor where you're constantly putting demand. Because we have powerful muscles in our upper arms. Biceps, triceps, big strong muscles. Flexors and extenders of our hands, they're not really designed to withstand the type of forces that we put up or we demand of them compared to what these ones are. And then we have cubital tunnel syndrome. So everybody here has heard of your funny bone. Your funny bone is not a bone, it's actually a nerve that runs very superficial to the surface here, and it's called the ulnar nerve. And what it does is it passes through all these structures here, and that thing can become entrapped. It's kind of like carpal tunnel syndrome, which we'll talk about in a minute. And often this is postural, physical wear and tear, repetitive motion, where we get a lot of inflammation here, but guess where we feel all the symptoms? Especially, have you ever had it? My pinky's really numb, my ring finger's really. I had a bout of this a few months ago, and it was really rough adjusting to it because I had virtually no feeling in my ring finger and my middle finger, and a lot of shooting pains going up there. And I was getting that thing adjusted regularly, doing a lot of ice, doing a lot of the exercise to get that thing back up and running. Because when these things don't work, we really can suffer, especially for people who've got to use their hands for their profession. So a lot of the stresses we've talked about for these other syndromes are the same stresses that we see affecting cubital fossa syndrome. So sleeping on your elbow, especially with a bent elbow, repetitive stresses, saying working overhead, resting your elbows on a hard surface, things like that. Self-care, again, a lot of these are going to seem very, very repetitive because rest, cryotherapy, ice, get it cold, let it relax, get it cold. Massage, soft tissue stuff, getting in there and working out those adhesions. A lot of times muscles are like little cables that slide back and forth, and every single cable has these little, it's like a saran wrapping around it. And we get adhesions in there, and we get chemicals, byproducts of metabolism that accumulate in there, and they usually form these really sensitive spots. And you got to get in there and break that up, and if we don't, and push that garbage out of there, we start to form scar tissue and things like that. And then some of those things, like the Katakesaurus special, that's what we're doing. We're getting there, we're breaking up that adhesion, we're getting in there and removing those restrictions on those muscles' ability to glide and slide past each other to allow us to have proper motion in there. We have exercises for these things too. And all these are in your note packet, so I'm not going to go through these, I'm just going to quickly explain these. If you guys ever have a question. So the big thing about these ones is eccentric, which not everybody knows what that means. So there's concentric, that's contracting a muscle. There's eccentric, that's elongating a muscle, okay? So the resistance we want here for a lateral is resisting as I go down. So I have my weight, and you notice they've got, it looks like a can of soda or something like that, which is really about the only thing soda's good for, can of soda's good for. Hold that gently and control that as it goes down. You don't need a lot of weight. That's why you don't have a dumbbell. You don't need a 5-pound dumbbell for this. Something like a can of soup, a can of beans, a can of soda, whatever you got, something light, and you just control that down, okay? And then there's eccentric wrist. So I start with my wrist up here, I control it as I move down. And that really helps to rehabilitate these muscles in the forearm. There's radial deviation. So your radius is that tiny bone that goes along the thumb side. Your ulna is the bigger bone that goes along the finger or the pinky side. Radial deviation is just bending it to the side of your thumb. So I get a light weight in there, and I deviate. Or if any of you saw that face to fly video, we can do things like the isometric where you're pulling like that, and I'm actively doing a tug of war. I'm trying to bring that thing up like that, but I'm not physically letting myself do it, okay? And, or you can do the pronation supination, where you get something like a hammer, and you just gently keep that elbow kind of anchored in there close, and you just over and over again, working these supinators and protonators to keep them moving, healthy, and functioning.